So today we're going to talk about a concept known as split pushing. And if you play League or Dota, for example, you might be familiar with it, but you play Overwatch and you don't play those games, and most likely you haven't even heard of the term. So let's discuss what split pushing is in like games like League and Dota, and we're going to look at how it applies to Overwatch. So in games like League, then at the beginning of the game, you're gonna have like this laning phase. You're just skirmishing. You're just trying to take one or two towers, for example. You're just trying to maybe get a couple picks, farm gold, get control of the map, and just try to like be in a better position than the enemy. But eventually, in League, there are gonna be objectives like in the jungle that will unlock, and you want to fight over those objectives. Like they're pretty valuable. But like in order to do so, because the enemy also wants it as much as you need to like kind of look to like group up a bit more, and you need to like take a team fight. So team fights in League, they're gonna look a lot like Overwatch. You're just gonna have like normally multiple players just look to kill each other. That's it. And usually you'd be playing a bit more grouped up than in the laning phase. So like normally team fights go this way. You have five players and like they have five players, you just duke it out until like someone wins. But a lot of team fights in League, they don't go this way because there is something they can do known as split pushing. So let's say your comp's really good at stalling. Like you can fight 4v5 and you're probably not going to win 4v5 obviously, but your comp has a lot of annoying things for the enemy to break through, and they can really like burn the clock and prolong the fight. Well, what you can do is like even though you're fighting over an objective, there's still going to be other relevant objectives. Like, for example, there's still going to be towers like remaining. And what you can do with those objectives is you can send one player to put pressure on like these objectives while like your team's like fighting the main objective. And this will do like two things. First, it will split enemy attention, so they don't know like whether to peel back and defend that objective that your one player is pushing, or like commit to the fight and try to like overpower your core, so to speak. And if they try to overpower your core, then if you're doing it in the right situation, then your core is gonna be pretty hard to kill. Like your core might be able to buy enough time for your like split pusher to take the objective that they're pressuring and return back and just fight over the objective. Or, in the worst case, maybe they win the objective, but your split pusher has already taken one or even two towers, and that could be more of an advantage. And like one of the biggest assets though is the fact that it splits enemy attention. It makes it hard for them to decide what to do. Indecisive teams, when met with this type of split push, they just fall apart. And if you're doing it in the right situations, then it can be a very effective tactic to like win team fights, and not only like win team fights, but even if you like lose the main fight, and then you might be able to just punish the enemy for winning the fight even. So that's the value of split pushing like in games like League. So let's talk about how it applies to Overwatch, and we're gonna look at like a couple examples of when a similar concept to split pushing arises in like professional play in this example. So let's take a look at what the equivalents of split pushing are for Overwatch. So right here, we're going to have Ball Tracer Sombra, and as we discussed a lot, Ball Tracer Sombra really benefits from having positions behind the enemy. And the more deep they're in the enemy backline with resources to use, the more pressure that the enemy is under to finish the fight quickly. Because otherwise, you're gonna have like a Ball Tracer Sombra with full cooldowns behind you, and they're just gonna like blow up your backline so easily. So you don't want that. But if their backline, like, if the ball team's backline can buy time, like exactly in that example earlier, like a team that can stall effectively and burn the clock, then what the ball tracer Sombra can do is they can just look to take positions behind the enemy, like just go even deeper, try to like lure the enemy into like a fight that they can just kind of like delay, stall, whatever. They don't really care. And afterwards, the enemy can just use their positions to counterattack and look for picks. Or if they just if the enemy team just like flat out tries to like blow up your backline, ignore it, well, and even if your backline like dies, like maybe your Brig or Zen dies, well, your Ball Tracer Sombra, you just have such good positions that like you're just gonna punish their backline for extending so far. So that's the that's like the monkey's paw that you want to create for the enemy when you're split pushing fights. And I use the term split pushing here, but we're gonna actually see that in action. And like the equivalent of split pushing is, you know, letting your backline take pressure, stall out the fight, while your like front line, so to speak, or like, you know, in this case, Ball plus Tracer Sombra tries to go deep, take deep positions, put pressure from the enemy, like on the enemy using their positions, and like just put the enemy in a situation that they can't win. So, so let's slow this down. So right here, Fio are just going to engage with Nano. But let's take a look at what the rest of Shanghai do. As you can see, they're rotating in, like Dallas. They're going in, but we're going to take a look at Tracer and Sombra. What do they do? So right here, while like Fuel are sending their Winston in, what Dragons are going to do is they're going to remain calm. Like they have Trans, they have Diva Bomb. They can survive for a bit. They can stall out the fight. And like even though they are stopping the cart and obviously they do want to fight for the cart eventually, the fact that like they're able to establish positions so deep in the enemy backline, the mean that Dragons do win this fight in the end. So like the original objective might matter for a bit, but eventually Dragons get the last laugh. So while this is happening, look at how Dragons' Ball Tracer Sombra are moving. They're not looking to immediately like take the fight. They're like going like, you know, split pushing, so to speak. They're going deeper into the enemy backline and putting pressure from them from the back. You can see Fleta goes here, Fate goes really deep into the backline. We also have Lip with an EMP. Feeling. And like this engage is gonna require like Field to commit players forward, baiting them into like Shanghai's trap, while like Shanghai are just putting pressure on the back and also setting up quite nicely for an eventual counterattack. So as you can see, even though like Li Zhangong dies, like this comp can't just stall forever, but it can stall long enough for Dragons' Ball Tracer Sombra to achieve a position where they just win the fight by their positioning alone. And we're gonna see why. Like, sure, Brig dies, but like Lip is able to put pressure on the players on field who are sitting back a bit more because you're gonna have to like place players like some players like a bit back. You don't want your supports like literally in the fight. So like you could treat them almost as like, you know, Overwatch equivalent of towers, but as you can see, their deep positioning allows Dragons to put pressure on the backline, put pressure on like anyone who has to sit back more, and that's gonna force Feel either to peel, which their comp doesn't really like do that well after committing so many cooldowns, or like they have to fully commit to the fight, in which case Dragons can just make it as annoying as possible, and that would just give Dragons a lot more time to set up and so-called split push the enemy. So like they trade a couple kills, but eventually Dragons are just able to like collapse on those who are like fighting. And Fearless even kills Lip, but it isn't gonna matter. As you can see, Fuel, they decide to commit to this fight. Instead of like peeling back the Ball Tracer Sombra. Which their comp is better at. Like their comp isn't that good in like peeling as compared to like pressuring the enemy. But while that's happening, knowing that Zen Cell's trans, then Ball Tracer, Sombra's dead, but Ball Tracer is still just gonna put pressure on, for example, Jexay. It's gonna put pressure on Sparkle, gonna put pressure on like Hanbin, and that's going to like cut off support from Fearless because they're too busy like dealing with the constant pressure from the back, and that eventually leads to Fearless's demise. And like notice how like Shanghai are just coming in from so many different angles that Dallas like they don't know like how to move in response to Fuel. So this is an example of a successful split push. Dragons know their backline can survive pressure, so they just play it slow when Fuel engaged. They just look to like put players behind, try to get a better position, try to put pressure on anyone who's trying to like quote unquote like so called defend the towers, basically like defend the backline, and those who have to sit back are going to be under more pressure as like opposed to like committing to the fight. And with all that pressure, dragons just win the fight in the end. This backline can stall, and like with that extra time, dragons know how to like win the fight using the amount of time they have and the positions that they've established for themselves. So let's take a look at like a couple more examples. Let's take a look at Glads versus Dragons.
Ready for battle.
So right here, it's the next fight, but the situation is Izyaki's going to have trans, so they are in a similar situation. But right here, we're gonna take a look at how Fate positions. Let's actually turn back a couple seconds. So while let me turn off these subjective sounds. While like Glads are like positioned to just go on the back line, Fate is just going to like go really deep into the enemy backline. And Fleta doesn't successfully do this. Like Fleta does commit a bit too soon, but Fate, just look at Fate. Like look at how much disruption Fate eventually does from his position. So let's slow things down, and we're gonna see Glads are gonna try to like go for a dive onto Dragons' backline. But Fate remains cool and collected. Fate knows that. Like, you know, he has his Zen is trans. He doesn't have to do anything right now. He'll have to do something in 6 seconds, but you can use that 6 seconds to look to quote unquote split push and set up deep into the backline, putting pressure on like the Brig Zen, who are going to be like counter engaged upon. And in fact, look at what happens. Kevster gets sent back to deal with Fate, but obviously Ball versus Tracer with that much health pool, Tracer cannot like single-handedly stop a Ball. So you already see like this split push, so to speak, force Glads to like commit one of their players back to deal with this threat. So it's already like somewhat successful at this point. And this is gonna put Kevster out of position to like follow up on this dive. Even though they are transing, they might want to have Kevster like behind to follow up on targets after the trans has expired. But now, after like peeling off the engage, let's take a look at how much damage and disruption Fate is able to do. So Fate's able to get Shu, who is way overextended, and force out the trans. And Fate's able to shoot from the back, drawing attention, and eventually he just boots a bunch of players and slams on them. And see, like the earlier boop, he only booped Tracer, but you know, but like doesn't even matter. Like he boops D.Va after, but like his position just allows him to take his time. Like he's already doing a lot of work from this position. And like look at how many players are sent back to deal with Fate. eventually. Like, Fate's still alive. Stand behind them. Like, EMP doesn't matter. And boom. So, we see this great initial decision by Fate to just go deep into the enemy backline pay off, like, really big. Like, this fight was close, and, like, it could have went Glads' way if Fate didn't recognize, hey, my Zen has trans, I can just, like, put pressure behind them, force, like, even Tracer back, and then use this position to just punish them and counterattack, and just, like, in general, punish Glads for being too committed to this fight. So, let's take a look at one more example of successful split pushing. And in this case, it's gonna do with an actual objective rather than just positioning. So... right here, as you can see, Rain are going to look for an engage, and they have Pelican back here, but the thing is, Dragons, like Izayaki, is trans. And also, their backline can't successfully get into the high ground, so Dragons know this engage is pretty bad. So Dragons, instead of like committing to this fight, like committing all 6 players of this fight, Dragons are just gonna look to like split push, and like quite literally now, because they're looking to force the point. And what that does is it puts Reigns' decision making after disengage into shambles. Like, look at how much they're worrying about the point and like Dragons' pressure simultaneously. Like, they go for an engage, but they force point. Some players like peel back to contest, like they even get the cap. And like, as they're trying to reclaim the point, it separates some players from Reigns' core, and this is bad because this is a comp that mostly wants to stay together. And like, you know, look, 3 players are trying to like contest point, and their backline is just exposed. Like, this initial split push by Fate literally just scattered Rain everywhere, and it's good to leave them a lot of like free targets to engage upon. They do get the cap like back, but it isn't gonna matter. Like, look at Reigns' positioning. It's terrible. And eventually, they get a pick. And this initial decision, like despite this EMP, just snowballed into a team fight win. So those are the 3 examples I wanted to show, but in conclusion, split pushing is using these 2 like facts. Like, 1, your backline, sorry for the font size, like 1, your backline can stall. Like, your backline's either like really strong, or like, you know, you're running, for example, like BAP, Brig, Bree, for example, or you have like defensive ults like Beat, Rally, Trans. Like, those are ults that favor split pushing and like that type of strategy. And let me actually write it better. And like, the second element of this is you have heroes that can actually like put pressure from behind. So, like, for example, let me just list some of them. Let me just write it first. Sorry, pressure. Sorry for my shitty handwriting. But this includes heroes like Ball, Tracer, Sombra, and to a lesser extent, you could even maybe have like some like a Genji, but Genji can't like play a split. Um, and like another example is maybe even Winston, but Winston is more easily forced out and can't really like get into those deep positions as reliably as Ball. And these 3 are like the big three split pushers in this game. The rest of the heroes, like while like if they have some mobility, they can like do that. Like these heroes are the best at it because they're self-sufficient, don't require like your backline like constantly supporting them. They can like survive on their own for a bit. And they're also like really good at putting pressure from behind. Like they're dive heroes. And even though you can use like other dive heroes, these are just the best of it. And these heroes define the split push playstyle that we've seen Shanghai just demonstrate over and over again. And like you could even have like heroes like Hog, for example, do this. Like could have Hog like just like look to flank and look for a hook, and that would put a lot of pressure. But Hog a bit less mobile, and you do need a bit of mobility to consistently do it because you're not gonna have like all the time in the world to stall. Like your backline can stall, but not forever. Again, sorry for my bad handwriting, but yeah, that's basically what I like go over with regards to this concept. I think it is an essential part of playing the ball comp, and if your team wants to like master the ball comp, then you need to master like split pushing because it is like what will win you games against like those more brawly comps and like for example Winston dive or like Talon dive, which is like the more Lucio with Winston type of deal, or like even like standard brawl, and like another thing is it also enables you to use your defensive ult. Like it's another big way of using defensive ults. So like using not only defensive ults but also defensive cooldowns. And let me actually so like knowing how to like mastering the skill will like give you a lot more value out of a beat, a rally, a trans, and this is like one of the main ways in which Shanghai got like so much value from rally and trans. They use that time to look to pressure from behind, take positions, pressure the objective, and that splits attention, allows them to win fights in the end. So, anyways, that's all I have to say, and hope that was helpful. And yeah, peace out.